I'm thrilled to start our afternoon with 15 style guide tips in 20 minutes presented by Amy Cesal, Jon Schwabish, Max Graze, and Alan Wilson. And we're lucky to be joined in person today by Amy and Alan. And just a quick intro for all our speakers. Amy is a freelance information design consultant, and Jon is a senior fellow at the Urban Institute and the founder of PolicyViz and host of the PolicyViz podcast. Max is a senior data visualization engineer at King, and Alan is a principal designer at Adobe. And they'll be introducing themselves far better during their presentation. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So good to be here. We're going to keep things light and breezy here after lunch. We might go over 20 minutes, just a little bit, but we're going to do our best. So yeah, as she said, I am Alan Wilson. I am a designer at Adobe. I work primarily on the Experience Cloud. I've done a lot of work with design systems and style guides, and establishing our data visualization standards and best practices. And I've been doing that for about 14 years now, and I'm excited to share some of the stuff I've learned.
Something more meaningful or not meaningful, where style guides come into play. I've done work for different companies and also for ones that I've worked for full-time in order to really streamline the process. And so I hope that this passion rubs off on you, or at least you learn a few things. Make data more accessible, intuitive, and also a little more fun. And so I do this by weaving in an interdisciplinary approach into my work. So it can be using sound, sonification, or playing with some of my hobbies like pottery to make data representations, and even using fermentation data. But I'm also really passionate about the nitty-gritties of data, and that's where style guides come into play. I've done work for different companies and also for ones that I've worked for full-time in order to really streamline the process. And so I hope that this passion rubs off on you, or at least you learn a few things.
My name is Jon Schwabish. I am a senior fellow at the Urban Institute, a nonprofit research institution based in Washington, D.C. I am trained as an economist, but I spent about the last decade working in the field of data visualization to help colleagues and coworkers and clients do a better job visualizing and communicating their data. One of the big projects that I've done at the Urban Institute is help create and update and revise our data visualization style guide, where we've provided tools, techniques, guidelines, and all sorts of resources to our staff of more than 600 people, primarily researchers and other economists, create better, more effective, and more consistent data products, including charts, graphs, diagrams, infographics, dashboards, interactive visualizations, and much, much more.
Hi, I'm Amy Cesal. You may know me as one of the co-founders of the Data Visualization Society. I'm so excited to be back here in Miami, where sort of the concept started. I am an instructor at MICA in the Data Analytics and Visualization graduate program, and I'm so excited to see students and alumni from that program here. I am also a freelance information designer and consultant, and I really love to help organizations create guidelines specifically for charts and graphs. I've done this work internally at a few organizations, and as the expert practitioner in the organization, it's often hard to get the perspective you need to analyze your own charts, run user visioning exercises, and create standards. So now I'm a consultant who comes in to work with organizations and help them do this work, and help them define how data visualization works in their organizations. Okay, so let's get to the talk. Can you guess the organization from looking at some of their charts? Where do we think this is from? The Economist. Very good. Let's try another one. What about here? Urban Institute. Look at, they're all consistent and concise. I wonder why. What do these organizations have in common? Style guides. They all have style guides for the visualizations, and that's one of the things that makes them consistent and identifiable. So we're going to give you some tips around style guides.
So this might be one of the hardest you want to involve as many people as you can, especially early on. So not just your supporters like the design team or chart nerds, people are going to be creating the charts, but you also want to bring in folks who use the charts, people who review work in the meeting, and especially the skeptics, the ones who are saying, do we really need a style guide? What is this useful for? So I labeled some personas that you might want to recruit for help. We have the enthusiast, so this is someone who's excited about the standards and is probably going to give you a lot of feedback and be very invested in the work. There's also the quiet user, so someone who uses charts every day but doesn't really give feedback or voice their opinion. And then we have the skeptic. So someone who may not love the process, but they will probably point out where it's unclear, rigid, or disconnected from their reality. So you want these people to stress test the guide early on. They'll show you where your assumptions do not hold. And when you bring them in the process, then the style guide becomes ours and not just yours.
When it comes to visualization style guide, my first tip is to engage your stakeholders. Talk to the people who are going to be using the style guide in their own work. What do they need? How do they need it? And what's going to help them do their jobs better? Talk to the people in your organization or talk to your client. Do this exploratory conversations to figure out what are their pain points, what are their biggest challenges, and how can you help them create more effective visualizations in the easiest and fastest way possible. At the Urban Institute, which is where I'll focus my remarks today, we have 11 different divisions along with a variety of different other groups, affinity groups, and other interest groups in the organization, all trying to conduct in-depth, sophisticated research about the United States. We have groups working on health policy. We have groups working on tax policy, groups working on equity. We have groups working on nutrition policy and retirement policy and aging, all sorts of different interest areas. But we're all trying to create the same thing. We're all trying to create reports and briefs, blog posts, data tools, interactive visualizations, narrative stories that are all trying to research aspects of the US economy. And so what that means is when we built the original style guide, and then of course when we revised it, we talked to people, what do they need? What are the things that are missing in that style guide that's going to help them do their jobs better? And when you go into the style guide, what you also see is that we've referenced and resourced all sorts of different teams around the organization. From our disability affinity group, who spends a lot of time thinking about and working on accessibility issues, to our Do No Harm project and our DEI toolkits, which focus on how to create more equitable and inclusive visualization and research products, to our R users groups, which has templates and tools and coding libraries to help you create better visualizations in R, and of course members of our communications team, from our data visualization team to our design team, our blog team, and our editorial team. All of these groups are particularly interested in creating better, more effective, and more consistent visual elements for our products. And so the first step to doing so is to actually engage people who are going to use your style guide to make sure that you are meeting their needs.
Next tip is to iterate. Iterate a lot. We've already heard about this today, and it's a really important part of the process. In design, there's two arms of this process. There's divergent thinking, where you generate lots of ideas, good ideas, bad ideas, they're all welcome. And then you deliberately whittle those down to the very best. If you skip that first step, and it's really tempting to skip that first step, you're really robbing yourself of a lot of the potential that you have to influence the styles of your org. So generate lots of ideas. Here's an example of just a few of the bullet charts we explored during an exercise.
Okay, tip number 4, know what you're working with. Before starting on guidelines or extending a color palette, I always urge clients to collect examples of charts they made. They don't have to be good. In fact, sometimes it's more helpful when they're bad or something you're not proud of, because it highlights a pain point for something you need more structure around, or maybe you don't have the correct tools in your toolbox to do properly. And that's what style guides do. They give people the tools to make effective charts. Collect as many examples as you can before you get started. This can be done in a structured spreadsheet, like an audit, or it can even be screenshots in a mural board, sort of like what I have pictured here. The format is less important than having a look at the past so you can accurately plan for the future. Without looking at prior work, you're just going to end up with a prefab house that could fit anywhere instead of a Frank Lloyd Wright house that fits the landscape of your organization.
My second tip when it comes to creating is to be practical. I don't think most people care about the color that they're supposed to use in their graphs and charts. I don't think most people care about what exact font they're supposed to use and the size it's going to be and where it should go. They just want to create good, consistent graphs that are going to get their message out there and hopefully be used by their readers or their users. And so when you're creating the guide, just be practical and just help people make decisions quickly and easily. This is perhaps my favorite image from the Urban Institute Style Guide. It is just a layout of a template of a basic graph. It tells you at the top where the title should go, what it should be, what the font size is, what the font type is. Then we have the subtitle on all the parts of the graph itself, from the axis labels to the legend to the grid lines to the sources and the notes. People just want to know, for the most part, people just want to know how to create a graph that is consistent and meets the branding guidelines of the organization. So be practical. Not everybody is a data visualization expert or is particularly interested in creating the newest, greatest, coolest type of data visualization that's out there. We have a lot of different graphs in our style guide, and we've provided guidelines and strategies to making those as effective and as good as possible. So we have this sort of big list at the very sort of in this one section of the style guide. And at the moment, to date, right now, there are only so many graphs. There's about 6 or 7 graphs where we actually provide detailed advice, detailed step-by-step instruction how to create these types of graphs as effectively as possible. And it's the basic charts that we all know. Bar charts and area charts and line charts and stacked bar charts and pie charts. We also have a separate section on maps and tables because those are, of course, sort of different. But notice that in this first iteration of the style guide, we're not going into detail on every different type of chart. Now again, as I'm sure you've already heard, the best way to make an effective style guide is to keep updating it, make it a living document, come back to it, revise and update. So over the next few months, I'm hoping to update our visualization style guide to include other types of charts that we do use. We do use them at the Urban Institute, but they're just not as frequently used. So we do use dot plots and slope charts and spark lines and Gantt charts, but they're just not used as frequently. So over the next few months, I hope to roll out additional considerations for these particular chart types in the style guide. Remember, your style guide is a living, breathing document, but when it comes down to it, just be practical. Think about what people need and how you can help them as quickly and easily as possible to create that great, effective, engaging graph, chart, or diagram.
All right, next tip is about format. Over my years of doing this type of work, I've created style guides in just about every format you can think, from a printed manual to a PDF to a website. What's important here is that you understand what people are going to be using, what tools they're going to use, and what information they're looking for, where they go to find their information. If a wiki is the standard in your org, do it on a wiki. But you also need to consider the tools of your authors. If your authors know InDesign really well, maybe a printed or a PDF is a really good way to go. If they're comfortable with code, maybe a GitHub library is the best way to go. Make sure you're balancing those needs so that your guide actually helps your org.
So every time you're making charts, especially getting these style guides in the beginning, you don't really have time to flip through the 20-page style guide to make sure that you've checked every box. Sometimes people just need a cheat sheet, and this can be done in several ways. I personally love using checklists with most important bits pointed out. They're summarizing best practices and parts of the style guide that users can use to make sure that their visualization complies, kind of like a QA for charts. And you can start by just pulling out the top 10 to 12 things and make it a one-pager. It's so much more likely to be used this way. Another option is to use a tiered checklist. So this would be including musts, which are non-negotiable, maybe like using color palettes or labeling your axes. Then we have shoulds, which are strong recommendations, perhaps labeling data directly. Cans are the fun stuff or optionals, so maybe adding animation or context. And this structure also gives us room to evolve. If we get feedback for something that's in the should category, people saying that maybe it's critical, we can bump it up later. The framework keeps things clear, flexible, and actionable.
Okay, tip number 7. We're halfway there of our 15, right? Limit your colors and include the whole rainbow. While this might seem like contradictory advice, every organization that I've worked with implementing a color palette for charts has eventually found themselves overwhelmed by the number of colors. Colors for data are the most important and noticeable pain point. That's usually where my contracts start. I'm called in because organizations need more colors for data. They need tints and tones of existing brand colors that meet color contrast standards when used alone. They need colors that look visually distinct from each other. They need sequential and diverging color palettes for ranges of data. They might even need colors that work well for specific categorical buckets like race or positive and negative data. So I work with organizations to extend the color scheme to fit these data needs. Well, and then chaos ensues, right? You have so many colors because now there are too many colors and people are overwhelmed by choice, or end up picking poorly and use a sequential color scheme for categorical data because it's ill-defined or there's not enough education in place to make the correct choice. The answer is then a small color palette for most data viz use cases and an extended section for advanced users like designers or data scientists. You need both. The users are different for each color palette and they need to work in harmony.
My is to be clear and concise. Remember, not everybody is a data visualization expert. Not everybody is a designer. They, for the most part, just want to know how to create that good chart, that good graph. Let me give you one example from the Urban Guide. Towards the top of our style guide, we have a section on color, and we have a section on chart typography. And you notice here in this highlighted sentence, right at the top here, we say, good chart typography creates a hierarchy among elements and guides the reader through the visual. Urban uses a defined set of font sizes and styles to create this hierarchy. So what we do in those two sentences, in that very short, concise paragraph, is we tell people why text hierarchy is important and how it's going to be used in your charts and diagrams to guide people through the graph. And then we're going to tell you that we have a defined set of font sizes, a defined font library, defined font styles, so you don't even have to think about it. We're going to give that all to you and help you create those graphs that meet the branding guidelines and the effective ways to actually help your reader work their way through their visual, and you're not going to have to think about it at all.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about onboarding. Sometimes we think about this as a separate, distinct thing from our style guides. But if you build a style guide and publish it and release it to your org, even if you announce it, most people are still going to struggle to know what to do with it. That's why whenever you have a new hire or a new release of your style guide, take time to onboard your team. Show them what it is, show them how to use it, show them how it works. We've done this and we found that the difference is substantial. Those team members that have been onboarded not only use the guide, but they have a better experience at the company. They feel more empowered to do the work they need to, and they have the tools to do that job.
Don't think of style guides as something you build once and then forget. If you want yours to be relevant, which you probably do, it needs regular check-ins. And this is where surveys come in. We recommend doing a formal survey every 6 to 12 months, and you're not just asking, do you like the guide, but you're measuring real impact. I wrote an article that goes into much more detail about this that you can check out later, but for now I'll give you a few spoilers. The most valuable feedback often comes when you're asking things like, how has the guide helped or hurt your productivity? How easy is it to find what you need? What parts of the guide do you trust or ignore? Pair those surveys with a couple one-on-one interviews and you're good to go. You'll get both breadth and depth. And also the act of asking for feedback sends a message. It's not a rule book carved in stone, but a living document. And that alone, I think, improves adoption and gives you the credibility to evolve it over time because you're working together. It's not just yours, it's ours.
Okay, tip number 12. Maybe this is controversial advice, but it's okay to have a different font for data viz. So the titles here are, like titles, right? The titles here are set in Playfair, but you wouldn't want to read a whole book in Playfair. Same thing applies for data. Data is dense, it's also short. You're designing for snippets of text to align to a certain space like labels rather than paragraphs of information. There's a different use case and a need for text for charts, and it needs to be scannable rather than flow like a paragraph of text. And the position of the text in data viz is often the most important thing, right? You want that label to be right next to that data point. The most versatile data viz often uses a condensed font. It's fine if you have a font that you use for charts and nowhere else in your system. And it's like using this more whimsical font for titles. It's a very different use case. So here we see some common fonts, Helvetica versus Roboto versus the condensed version and another condensed font, and see how much space saving you can get there. And so you can really make sure that that position is accurate. Same thing looking at the different condensed fonts of this family called Flamma, and how much space you can save and really get that positioning right, because that's the most important thing, especially when you're just having that short snippet of text.
So guidelines can be difficult to read. If you've ever encountered especially a large one, it's a lot to process. And people tend to use them as references more than anything else. And I love examples when it comes to this. There's no better way to convey the information than to see the rule being followed. But in addition to seeing it followed, it's nice to see the contrast. Show what it looks like when you break the rule. Show a bad example and show why it's bad. You'll see here in this section of guidelines, we have a headline, which again states the rule, the guideline in a very concise way. We have some backup text, a description, and then we have the images. So there's 4 ways, even if you think of the bad example as a separate thing, that we're conveying the information, which gives us more chances, more opportunities for people to understand and internalize this.
Okay, second to last tip here, hopefully this is not controversial, include accessibility. You're creating standards for your organization, which will serve as the ideal for future work, that future work will be based off of. Make sure the guidelines that are outlined meet accessibility requirements. You will probably find use cases where you need to figure out alternatives or situations where accessibility is harder to achieve, but start from a place where most of what you do meets the accessibility minimums. Where do you start? Color contrast. Make sure colors in charts have sufficient contrast with the background to meet WCAG guidelines, and that your text is sufficient size and color contrast with the background. Figure out a few options for dual encoding so that you're not just relying on color, and include how to write alt text as part of the process. So this is thought through at the beginning and not just a last-minute addition that your alt text is written by AI because you haven't thought about it. These are just a few ways that you can bake good accessibility practices into style guidelines.
All right, last tip is about teaching the fundamentals. Style guides are great, and like John was saying earlier, most of your users just want to get in and get out. They want to know what to do, and they don't want to have to think about it. But some people do want to think about it. They want to question this. They want to understand it. They want to get better at it. They might even want to come to this conference someday. So give them that opportunity. Show them some fundamentals. Teach them the basics of data if they're coming from the design side. Or if they're struggling with encoding, make sure that as you're explaining things like color and legends and scales, that you do so in a way that elevates their understanding of how data is correctly visualized. And that's it. That's our 15 tips. Thank you. On this little website, datavizstyleguide.com. We have compiled a list of over 50?
Over 50.
Over 50 now, different style guides that you can look at for yourself, see examples. If you know of others, come to the website and contribute. We'd love to keep adding to this list, updating it as you update your style guides. And we're also publishing articles and little things to help you as you're creating style guides for your organization. All right, now we're ready for Q&A.
I think we'll have time for one question. I didn't see any Q&A in the chat, so maybe Raquel can go around and ask from someone in the room. But I'm shook at how much information y'all managed to fit into 20, 25 minutes.
You got the 15 tips, you didn't get the 20 minutes.
Okay. So visual consistency is definitely important. But I work in a large enterprise, and there's often a need for some nuance to differentiate some of our programs or some of our other teams. So when developing a style guide, how do you allow for those nuances within the style guide itself?
Sure. The first thing I always say is it's a guideline. We do not create hard and fast rules. We really try and empower teams to make their own decisions. This is all about giving them resources to help them along the way. So when they have questions, they have answers that adhere to those guidelines, they're great. But we always give them the freedom to go outside of that. And then we work with them. I work with a lot of people on special use cases that are nuanced enough that I don't even want them in the guidelines because they'll just confuse everyone else. I don't know if you want to add anything, Amy?
Yeah, I would emphasize guidelines are guidelines, and if you're all working from the same starting point, then you're going to have that visual consistency, and then if each team deviates a bit in their own way, they can have their sub-branding or their own guidelines that add to it, but you're all starting from the same base point.
Thank you.
I'll give you one more question. I'm feeling nice.
Who was first? You were first?
Hi, I'm curious, it's like, because you mentioned just now, you say it's a guideline, it's just a guideline. Then is there any, place or tools in place to check or somewhat enforce the guideline if people don't follow? Because I feel like a lot of place struggles is they have a guideline, but then sometimes people look at it, sometimes people don't, and some people use creative ways. So in the end, it doesn't really consistency. It's for example, newsroom, right? You can have an editor, they can strictly enforce everything published, but in a corporate world, a lot of things is out of the style guide, even the team's hands.
Yeah, this is something I've encountered a lot, and a couple of things. The review regularly aspect of it, of also reviewing the charts that you produce. So what is getting missed? Where are things deviating from this guideline? Maybe that's something that you need to talk about more in the guidelines or do a training on, right? That onboarding matters tip. If people know about it at the beginning when they start at the organization, if you do regular trainings on it, regular onboarding to it, that can really help. And then either your organization does a carrot or stick sort of mentality. So you're either policing every chart that goes out, and that is a review task for your team, and that's a whole lift, or you are just highlighting good examples and are congratulating people when they do things right as good examples, and building that culture of good data viz, either through Slack channels or meetups or things like that.
Yep. No, it really is about helping, not policing. We've gone down that road at Adobe with scorecards and design critiques and these gates that people, it did not work at all. And it really undermined what we were trying to do, which was just to help people be better at what they do.
Thank you both so much for being here.